Okay, moving on to the next segment of today's show. I wanted to talk about the Washington football team and their decision to cut their former first round pick at quarterback from Ohio State, Dwayne Haskins. And this is just such a crazy situation, and I feel like there are so many different ways that we could look into this, but I'll start off here. I think that even though so far throughout his career with the Washington football team, we could all agree Dwayne Haskins has been very, very disappointing. The Washington football team selected him with the number 15 overall pick in the 2019 NFL draft, and I feel like Haskins was a guy that while he was at Ohio State, we actually watched a decent amount of. This is a guy who broke the Big Ten record for touchdown passes, albeit in an offense with some really talented players around them. But there were a lot of people that questioned the New York Giants for taking Daniel Jones over Dwayne Haskins so early in that draft. There were many people that were very curious as to why Dwayne Haskins went number 15 overall in that draft opposed to earlier. There were some people that really did believe he was the best quarterback prospect in that draft. And unfortunately, his time in Washington has come to an end. And it's crazy because I do think that Dwayne Haskins, even though we look at his career in Washington after the first year and change, we all agree it hasn't necessarily gone well. But this guy has had so many different opportunities to change his perception and to change everything that really all the fans think about him. He was labeled a bust very early, I believe, and he had a real opportunity to change that narrative, and unfortunately, he just didn't do that. I think that in this situation, right, you looked at this game, it's easy to say Dwayne Haskins sucks, Washington made the right decision cutting him, that game against Carolina was just super embarrassing, and it was. But here's the crazy thing. As bad as Dwayne Haskins has been during his career in Washington, he really could have changed the narrative on Sunday. If the Washington football team would have beaten the Carolina Panthers, and keep in mind, they were at home, they were playing against a team that, let's face facts, is not very good right now. The Carolina Panthers are just not a very good football team. They're going to be a squad that is picking top 10 in the draft. If Washington could have beaten them, and Dwayne Haskins, whatever he did, if he would have just been a game manager, if he was swinging the ball all over the field, if Washington would have just beaten Carolina, I think the narrative of Dwayne Haskins changes at least a little bit, even if he didn't necessarily play well, because if Washington beats Carolina, they win the NFC East. And the Washington football team and their fans could say, okay, look, it's been a rough start to the career of Dwayne Haskins, but at the same time, when our guy, Alex Smith, got hurt and we needed someone to step up off the bench, Dwayne Haskins would be that guy. And for a guy that's a former first-round pick, I believe all Washington fans would have loved to see that. After everything that went down last week with Dwayne Haskins attending the strip club and not wearing his mask, that was obviously a really bad look for him. And I could tell during Ron Rivera's press conference the other day, he was just not happy with the whole situation. He was getting sick and tired of reporters asking him about Dwayne Haskins. I even heard that Ron Rivera was even considering cutting him last week, but the only reason why he didn't was because of the fact that, okay, Alex Smith was hurt, and even though Dwayne Haskins was out here breaking COVID protocols, and he obviously hasn't been very good since he's gone to Washington, it was going to be very hard for Ron Rivera to tell the other 52 guys in that Washington football team locker room that he would rather have a guy in Taylor Heinicke who, let's face facts, he's not very experienced. This is a guy that just got to Washington, isn't really that familiar with the offense. At least Dwayne Haskins can say, I've been studying this offense for the whole season, and he's been in Washington for 2 years now. He has experience playing with these guys. It would have been a rough message, I thought, for Ron Rivera to send to the rest of his team that with the NFC East division title on the line, he was going to play Taylor Heinicke instead of Dwayne Haskins. But I feel like after everything that went down on Sunday against the Carolina Panthers, Rivera had no choice but to make this move. I don't think you guys realize just how difficult it is when you're a quarterback in the NFL that gets taken in the first round. And I'm not even saying top 10. I'm just saying the first round in general. Do you guys know how hard it is for a quarterback to get cut less than 2 years into his career with the squad he was drafted by in the first round? Do you know how many different opportunities Dwayne Haskins must have gotten to turn this thing around for him and the Washington football team? Because it was a lot. And the thing that really bothered me was, okay, on Monday, he gets caught at the strip club following the game against Seattle, where, let's face facts, even though the Washington football team didn't play that well in the beginning of the game, at the end they actually did have a slight opportunity to get the dub, and they probably would have won that game if Dwayne Haskins played just a little bit better. But he sucked against Seattle. Let's face facts. He was not good that day. And I believe if Washington had better quarterback play, they would have had a real, legitimate chance to win that game against Seattle. And if they would have won that game, they would have now been sitting here as the NFC East champions. But Haskins, he loses the game to Seattle, and he gets caught at the strip club. And the thing that really caught my attention, well, really two things. Number one, I love how Dwayne Haskins is saying after, oh, it wasn't a strip club. It just was a birthday party with strippers. Okay, dude, what's the big deal, bro? What's the difference? That quote right there kind of just told me all I needed to know about Dwayne Haskins and how the trajectory of his football career was going. But he said after that press conference, when he was addressing everything that went down at that party, he was like, look, I'm now aware that I'm getting a second chance. I'm going to do everything I can to make up for the mistakes I made. And I feel like when you consider the fact that Dwayne Haskins was the only available quarterback for Ron Rivera and the Washington football team on Sunday, and if they would have won this game, once again, they would have been the champions of the NFC East. I thought to myself, okay, we'll see how Dwayne comes out on Sunday against Carolina, and maybe, just maybe, he learns his lesson, and maybe he could play well, and Washington could win the division. Well, the opposite happened, because he clearly, in that game against Carolina, looked very unprepared. And I feel like he just made mistake after mistake after mistake, which cost Washington the football game. And I get it. It's one of those things where Terry McLaurin was hurt. Washington's offensive line isn't great right now. Antonio Gibson played, but he's still banged up. So when your top dogs are J.D. McKissick and Antonio Gandy Golden and Cam Sims, I get it. I didn't necessarily expect Dwayne Haskins to come out here and light the world on fire, but you could tell watching that game against Carolina, he was just not ready to play. And then after the game, this is what really bothers me. Haskins said in that press conference on Monday, once again, I am thankful for my second opportunity. I'm going to do everything I can to take advantage of it. Well, Dwayne, I'll say this, bro. It's not a great look when you say that, and literally in that same week, you play like crap, you get benched, and all of a sudden, you don't talk to the media after the game because you thought that they didn't want to talk to you? Dwayne, I understand you're only a second-year player, but isn't it football 101 that when you're a former first-round pick, especially as recently as Haskins was only 2 years ago, and everything that's been surrounding him, and you just ditch the media after the game, and you say that the reason why you did it was because you didn't necessarily know if the media wanted to talk to you? Like, come on, dude. That's football 101. You were a quarterback that was drafted in the first round very recently that just got benched, and all of a sudden, very quickly, Dwayne Haskins was becoming one of the top storylines in the NFL that literally everyone around the league was talking about. And your actions are, okay, I'm just not going to talk to the media after the game, and your excuse is, oh, I didn't know they wanted to talk to me? Come on, Dwayne. It's a rule in football that if you are a starting quarterback of a team, you are obligated, unless you're injured, to talk to the media. And then Haskins, it was very awkward. He said he drove home not knowing that the media wanted to talk to him. And then Washington and their PR department were trying to get a hold of him. Ultimately, that didn't happen, and he did a very awkward press conference from his house. Just a very odd situation for Dwayne Haskins and the Washington football team. But I do think ultimately Ron Rivera and company made the right decision. They had to move on. And even with Alex Smith being banged up, we're not 100% sure if he's going to be able to play in the Sunday Night Football game against Philadelphia. And if Washington wins that game, they will obviously be the champions of the NFC East. But when you look at this whole situation and everything that has gone on, I do think that in the end, even though it does appear very obvious now that Washington made a huge mistake drafting Dwayne Haskins in the first round, I do think that as time goes on, we will all realize that this was the right move for the Washington football team to make. The reason why I think ultimately this is going to end up being a very good move for the Washington football team is that we all know historically over the last couple decades the perception of Daniel Snyder and everything that he's been as an owner. Apparently there were a lot of rumors going around that Daniel Snyder really had a big impact why Washington ended up drafting Dwayne Haskins with the number 15 overall pick in that draft. Daniel Snyder's son actually played high school football with Dwayne Haskins, and apparently many people in that Washington football draft room really did not want the football team to take Dwayne Haskins, but Daniel Snyder's the owner of the team, and at that time Washington was in that very toxic state, and basically everything he said went. And you guys know that when you're an owner of an NFL team, that's usually not the way successful teams are ran. And now when you look at it, Daniel Snyder has really taken control and has given it to Ron Rivera. And I think when Ron Rivera was hired, that was really one of the main reasons he was brought in to Washington for. We all know that Ron Rivera is known to be a coach that changes the culture. In Carolina, when he was first hired, that Carolina Panther team was good, but they couldn't necessarily get over the edge, and they were rebuilding at the time when they drafted Cam Newton, and they really wanted Ron Rivera to establish a new culture and a new attitude in Carolina. And when you look at Washington and all the allegations that have gone on with that squad over the last couple years with the sexual harassment and the name change and everything, we all know that Washington and the rest of their team was in a place where they just needed a fresh start. They needed a new voice. They needed a new culture in that building. And a lot of people probably were surprised that Daniel Snyder, an owner that has been very, very stubborn over the last couple of years, was okay with Ron Rivera cutting a guy that he drafted so high in that draft and a guy that his son played high school football with. But ultimately, it tells me that Ron Rivera is a guy that doesn't deal with any nonsense. He doesn't deal with any crap, and he just wasn't having it anymore. And that is moves like this are gonna really establish that new culture in Washington. And if somehow, some way, whether it's Alex Smith or Taylor Heineke suiting up under center on Sunday Night Football against the Philadelphia Eagles, the Washington football team does have a chance to win the NFC East. And if anyone would have said that in the beginning of the season, you would have thought they were crazy. But somehow, some way, the football team is right in it. And I do think ultimately moving on from Dwayne Haskins was a decision that had to be made.